Okay, so I have a basic sketch here, and I'm going to use this as the plan or the strategy to create my robot. Now, this sort of thing is going to save me a lot of time, having a pretty clear idea of what I want to build before I go into Cinema 4D. Now, um, that doesn't necessarily mean that my robot has to look exactly like this, but it gives me an idea of something to start. So I'm not designing necessarily the concept within Cinema 4D. So I have my idea, did a quick sketch here in Miro, and but before I get rolling, I really want to just establish my project file. So I'm going to jump into my external hard drive, and that's where I've been saving everything for this class. So I'm going to go into my semester folder, into the class folder, and I'm going to establish a new folder, and I'll call this robot. So we'll treat this like a standard folder, standard project folder. I'm going to introduce a resources folder. And inside my resources folder, I'm going to keep the robot examples that I've downloaded from Blackboard. So these are all the examples I was looking at. And I also might, you know, I might save the sketch that I created. I might save that in resources. And if I go out and take some photographs of some textures that I want to use, or references for textures that I might want to add, I would include that sort of thing in references. Chances are I'm going to build some textures from the ground up. And so at this point, it's a pretty good idea when you're setting up your project folder to create a new folder and create a text folder, TEX. So once I have a text folder, should I decide to use textures that are based on bitmaps or Photoshop images or JPEGs, I have a place to save those right off the bat. And if I don't use it, it's no big deal. It's just an empty folder. And except I don't want that in my resources folder. I inadvertently created the text folder inside the resources folder. I want that to be in the root of my project folder. So at this point, I have my robot folder, I have a resources folder, and I have a text folder. And I'm going to let my Cinema 4D project files just kind of run free here in the root of the robot project. So I'm going to jump into Cinema 4D. And before I even create anything, I'm going to do a quick file save as. And I'll choose the location of my first project. And I'll call this robot01. And I'll save. And I'm going to jump back to my sketch just for a minute here. And I'm going to focus on, I'm going to build just a rough shape for the torso. And I'm going to do this based on a real simple cylinder. And that'll kind of get my space, my project oriented, so I have something to build off of. So I'm going to start off by creating a cylinder because I think that's the most appropriate thing for my design. And now, once I've established that, this is going to be the rough body, I can always go back and change this, and I'm going to name it these parts as I start to build them. I can always go back and change this and swap this out. This shape, though, again, it does have a front and back orientation, and we got to remind ourselves that Z is the front and back axis. And it just so happens that Cinema 4D, the direction of the arrow, you can think of this as the direction of the front-facing camera. So the direction of the Z axis is pointing back through space. So this side of the object would be considered the front of the object. On Z, this side of the object, the back of Z would be considered the back of the object. Okay, so with that in mind, we want to have our head somewhere, facing this direction over here, nearest my mouse. Okay, so I'm not sure that the proportion's exactly right for the body, but I just want to create some stuff to kind of get some reference points here to start building. So the next thing that I'm going to create is the basic shape of the head. Now, based on my sketch, the head is effectively a cylinder, but it's got a little bit of a taper in it. And I did, just kind of had a taper in this when I was sketching it. And I kind of like that. It's going to give it character. One of the things it's easy to fall into in 3D, things can be so precise in 3D that we actually want to, kind of dirty them up, make them a little bit more imprecise. And that's going to go a long way to lend itself to, giving things character. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna use the same strategy I did with the snowman hat, and I'm gonna start off with a cone, and I'm gonna adjust the top radius, and that'll give me the ability to really, kind of cause this thing to taper. Just the height a little bit. Okay, and I'll jump back to my sketch to remind myself what's going on here. So it's getting bigger as it goes down towards the bottom. So I have that a little backwards. So something like that. And I'll adjust the height. Now again, I don't have to be perfect with this at this point. You know, I'm just trying to get a sense of how this thing's going to come together. Okay, and I can always make design decisions while I'm you know, kind of fine tuning this, but I'm just going to rough it out right now. So I'll go back and forth. I'll go back to my sketch less and less. So my head looks a little bit taller than it does in Cinema 4D, but I'm going to add the jaw as a separate piece, and that'll really give me something to you know, I'll be able to elongate that head, or I can always make that longer a little bit later. So again, I'm just going to rough out some real basic shapes here. The next thing that I'm going to do is come up with some sort of a socket to connect the head to the torso. And I'm going to use the same strategies that we used when we started building the lamp, and that's just some real basic parts. I'm going to use this cylinder as kind of a stem, and so I'm adjusting this by grabbing these orange control points with the mouse, and sometimes it gets a little tricky just based on the size and the scale of the object. I'm tapping the S key just to kind of zoom in and out, and sometimes if I lose those points behind the axis, I'll just go over here and play with the values in the attribute manager. So in this case, for the neck, you know, I really want to lay this thing down on its side and attach it to what's eventually going to be the head and the body here. And if you remember, I have a couple of different ways to do this. I can rotate this and hold down the shift key while I'm rotating, and I'm looking for that 90-degree increment in the heads-up display. Alternatively, with that object selected in the attributes manager, I can actually change the orientation along Z. So I think in this case, I'll just change that orientation in Z. And again, I'm not going to be too precise about this, but so I'm just going to kind of feel my way through this. So I got that piece more or less where I want it, and this is kind of a neck piece. I'm not going to call it neck just yet because I'm actually going to combine a couple of pieces here. So I've just created the sphere, and this is going to be kind of the ball and socket. And so I want to get these pieces to line up, the cylinder and the sphere. And there's a tool inside Cinema 4D that's kind of a lot like the alignment tool in Illustrator or InDesign. And if I go to Function Center, I got to have both objects selected. So I have the sphere and the cylinder selected. And if I go to Functions Center, I can center these objects based on different axes. So I want to center these according to the Y. So in the Attributes Manager, I'm going to go to the Y axis, and I'm going to set that to middle. Okay, so what that's going to do is it's going to set along the Y axis, it's going to arrange the sphere and the cylinder kind of on the same orientation, the same Y value. And that should be all I have to do because I've only moved these things, you know, according to a few axes. I'll hit apply and see how that does. So that kind of lines them up. I'm just going to eyeball the sphere and move it over until it just intersects. That looks like about where I want it. And I'm going to copy the sphere and paste it. And I'll reuse that piece there towards the end. And I'm just going to tweak this a little bit. And so now I have this piece that's made up of two spheres and a cylinder, and that'll basically act as my neck joint. I'm gonna group these objects by going to the Object pull-down menu in the Object Manager, and group objects, or I could have Alt-G, and I'll call that neck. I'm not so much going to worry about the parent-child relationship here yet, although that's going to come into play. I definitely want to take advantage of that, so I'll do that in just a bit. So now my neck is actually a little bit longer than it needs to be, and so I'm going to experiment with taking my head and just kind of moving that out and see if it sticks it out too far. Now I feel like that's a little too far. It's a little too long. I don't want my neck that long because now the head's sticking way too far off the body for me. So what I'll do is I'll dig into the neck. I'll grab the cylinder that represents the length of the neck, and I'll just adjust the height a bit. And now I'll go back in and adjust those spheres a bit. And again, I'm not really being too precise with this at this point. I mean, I'm making sure that things are lined up, but I'm really just kind of eyeballing things. And I can go back and select the neck and kind of move those back into place. And I'll take the head and I'll move that back. So that gives me kind of an idea or a reference to get the body started. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'll throw some really quick arms into the equation. I'm not going to over design the arm shape at this point, but I will show you a few new tricks, and we'll do that in the next presentation.